So I saw Transformers 1 and I thought it was really good. I held off my excitement for this movie because I got a little too excited for Rise of the Beast. So excited that I made a whole video about how Mirage could be a better character than Bumblebee, and I regret making that video every day. After being disappointed in Rise of the Beast, I wanted to reserve my excitement because I wasn't sure if it was going to be that good. The first trailer to me wasn't all that exciting. The trailer marketed the movie as if it were catering to 10-year-olds. There were quite a few jokes, the character designs looked like toys, and the overall tone of the trailer felt lighter, which isn't a bad thing. I'm completely okay with a Transformer movie catering to kids because it's a story about giant robots that turn into cars in order to sell toys. It's not something a lot of adults would be excited for. Even if the movie was geared more towards 10-year-olds, I probably would have watched it anyways. I can't help that I like giant robots that turn into cars. When that new G.I. Joe and Transformer crossover movie comes out, I'm definitely gonna watch that, even if I know it's gonna be bad. I didn't think it was gonna be bad, but I wasn't expecting something great. But boy was I wrong. When I tell you this movie rips, I truly hope you take my opinion into consideration. This movie has great characters, great action, a heartfelt story, a villain that you can genuinely hate, and some of the most beautiful animation I've ever seen. Each character has their own distinct character traits and personalities, which have been missing for a very long time. No longer are the Transformers stereotypes or lack personalities. No longer are the alien robots throwing racial slurs at me, and it's refreshing. Alita 1 and Bumblebee were great. I like that Alita grows into a character that learns to trust others, and I thought Bumblebee was gonna annoy me throughout the movie, but it didn't take long for me to enjoy his lighthearted nature in a movie that can get pretty dark at times for a kids movie. I didn't think the Badassatron joke was all that funny when I saw the trailer, but I found myself quoting the joke around the house. When I'm making a sandwich,
Badassatron.
when I'm using the bathroom,
Badassatron.
when I'm walking my dog,
Badassatron.
This is also probably one of the best adaptations of both Optimus and Megatron ever. Orion Pax is a very optimistic and active character. He sees the potential not only in Cybertron, but also his fellow miners. He has an it'll work out in the end attitude that the other characters find off-putting at first, but quickly admire. His strong mentality throughout the story proves why he was chosen to be a Prime. And when he earns that title, it hits an emotional core I haven't felt towards Transformers in a long time. He gives some of the most Optimus Prime speeches before he even becomes Optimus Prime. And Chris Hemsworth puts his tailpipe into this performance. There are moments I completely forgot Orion was played by Chris Hemsworth. Obviously he's trying to sound like Peter Cullen, but it comes off as a performance that's inspired by Peter, not just trying to copy him. Chris takes that voice and makes it his own, and it works very well. And I felt D16's transformation into Megatron was handled well. This is a character who always followed the rules until he's shown that following the rules cost him his freedom. He's stripped of his identity, forced to work meaningless labor, and after that realization, he chose to forge his own identity. I was a little concerned that Brian Tyree Henry wasn't going to be able to perform a voice that feels like Megatron, but I was wrong again. I will say, there are some moments within his voice that just sound like Brian Tyree Henry, but when he's giving those speeches,
The age of crimes has ended! No more false prophets! Follow me, and you will never again be deceived!
Lord have mercy, I'm about to bust.
His dialogue and demeanor were unapologetically Megatron, which also felt like they were inspired by the War for Cybertron games. Some people feel his arc into Megatron was rushed, but I don't feel that at all. If it were rushed, he would be the best friend throughout the whole story until the very end, but that's not what happens here. You can visibly see him change halfway through the story with not just the color of his eyes, but also his mannerisms change as well. As the story progresses, he slowly becomes distant from his friend and becomes more and more angry. He stops being Orion's trusted best friend halfway into the story, and he stays like this until the end of the movie. When people say they only see red, they're usually over-exaggerating, but D16 is literally only focused on getting revenge. There are moments when Orion is trying to come up with a plan with D16, and D16 is literally waving it away, like he does not care. And at one point, he gets so pissed that he conjures his iconic fusion cannon. Megatron is a demon, bro. When Megatron ripped Sentinel in half, all I could think of was, that's Megatron. There were so many shots in here that I just looked at and was like, that's Megatron. That right there is Megatron. And this story wouldn't have hit as hard if their relationship wasn't believable. D16 and Orion Pax are truly the heart of the story. They joke around and argue like brothers, which is something we have never seen before in a Transformers movie. And when they inevitably have their falling out over differences in ideologies, the emotional scenes hold more weight because we spent so much time with them as best friends. This is the part of the review where I just start glazing the movie, I'm sorry. The execution of Megatron realizing Orion was holding him back was perfect. The music, the tension, and Brian's delivery was absolutely perfect.
I'm done saving you.
Then having the bottom of Cybertron transform in order to expose the core as Orion falls was pure genius. Then having the birth of both Megatron and Optimus Prime simultaneously was executed perfectly. I can't stress enough how amazing that whole sequence was. I've watched it too many times now. I also love that this story had parallel scenes with Orion and D16 inspiring different groups that define their characters perfectly. D16's speech is aggressive, full of anger and rage, while Orion's speech is calm, heartwarming, and full of optimism. These two scenes were written by people who understand Orion and D16 as characters, and is perfectly executed. I don't know how many times I can say the word perfectly executed. And the last character I want to talk about is Sentinel Prime. I think Sentinel is just destined to be the worst person in every adaptation because here, he's so unapologetically smug and full of himself. And I'd be a liar if I said it wasn't entertaining.
I'm going to rip you apart piece by piece so that your death is painful and you'll regret the death.
He's so evil, and I'm glad they didn't make him this misunderstood villain. He's evil, and he knows he's evil, but it sucks that I can't completely hate him because his character design is pretty sick, and he's actually funny.
You're the traitor.
Some people have been comparing him to Homelander, and I did kind of catch that vibe when I was watching it for the first time. He's like a very toned down version of Homelander. Another thing I want to talk about is the action. The characters utilize transformations in some of the most fun and unique ways I've ever seen. They don't just go from car to robot and back to car. Sometimes they'll transform just parts of their body to get an advantage in a fight. If they need to dodge an attack, they might transform just their head. Megatron pulls this crazy 200 IQ move that I have never seen before in any Transformer movie. I don't think the Bayverse action was bad, but I'd definitely take this type of action over robots doing karate any day. Every hit feels heavy and you can see the characters clearly, and the kills in here are brutal. Not as brutal as the Bay movies, but characters will get ripped in half or dismantled, and it is amazing. And I hope we get to see more stuff like that in the next movie, if there is one. I also love the sound design in this movie. Each character's transformations and gunfire sound unique with a variety of satisfying sounds. I wouldn't be surprised if they developed a different sound for each individual moment a character transforms anything. And the soundtrack is also really good. In the theater, I knew I was going to download the soundtrack as soon as I heard this. Is pretty good, but there are some things I gotta complain about. I'm sorry. The first problem I have with this movie is the pacing. This movie is only an hour and 40 minutes long, which is the second shortest Transformers movie behind the '86 movie, and I feel like it could have taken a couple minutes to slow down. When they're traveling, sometimes it feels like they're going from point A to point B way too quickly. Characters will say they need to get to a place, and the movie will almost immediately cut to them arriving at their destination. And while the action does push the story, I feel some of the action happens just a little too soon. Some of them, not all of them, just some of them. Just a wee bit. Like the pacing, I feel a couple scenes could use like 3 or 4 minutes before the action actually starts. I feel like that might be too long, actually. Another thing I feel is missing is Cybertron's society as a whole. We only really know about miners and Bumblebee as waste management. We don't get to see other hardworking jobs or what other bots are doing in Icon City other than mining. We see bots in places that aren't the mines, but we never get to explore that at all. It really does feel like Icon City is the only civilization on Cybertron. And lastly, I don't think we get enough exploration in the hardships of being a miner. I'm glad the movie demonstrates how dangerous being a miner is, but other than that one demonstration, we don't get to explore the mining community. movie. We're told they're being overworked, but we don't get to see how that affects the bots or the community as a whole. There aren't bots falling apart because of how much they're being overworked, or even long lines of bots in need of repairs. A character in the movie gets injured and we literally move on to a different conflict right after they're saved. We don't get to see them being repaired, we just move on. And I feel like this would help push Megatron's ideology. Last thing I want to talk about is Arachnid. Maybe I've been spoiled over the years, but most of the time when Arachnid is introduced, she has a personality. But here, she's just a servant of Sentinel. I'm not saying she has to be a fleshed out character or have a separate goal from Sentinel. It would just be nice to have a personality that can bounce off of Sentinel well. But almost every character has a personality, so I feel like the movie makes up for it. And before I end this review, I want to quickly talk about some discourse I've seen on the internet. Some people feel Shockwave was characterized terribly. They feel Shockwave isn't as cold or as calculating as he should have been, and I get where they're coming from, but I don't think a cold and calculating Shockwave really has a place in this story. Hey, look at that, Shockwave talking 2 videos back to back. If Shockwave were to be the evil, mad scientist, it wouldn't push the story they're trying to tell. If he were dissecting Quintessons or other Transformers, it would do no favors for the story they're trying to tell. Being a mad scientist wouldn't have fixed any of their problems anyways. You could have him be monotone and stay logical all the time, but that could get really old really fast. And he doesn't have that many lines anyways. And if he was monotone, you would have 2 monotone characters on screen together, since Soundwave fills the spot. I think his characterization was fine, especially since this is a story that isn't really focusing on how the Decepticons are formed, and the war hasn't even started yet. And if you're gonna get mad at the characterization of Shockwave, you might as well get mad at the characterization of Megatronus Prime, who wasn't the first Decepticon or a follower of Unicron in this movie. He was just a Prime. In the next movie, if there is one, I do expect Shockwave to play a bigger role in the story, so we'll see how his character is handled in that. And one last little nitpick, I don't really like Soundwave's voice. It's not a criticism on the movie, nor am I deducting points because of it. It's just a me problem, and I can admit that. But I'm gonna end this video by saying, for me, this movie is an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's the best Transformers movie ever made, but some people will say the 86 movie is the best one, but I can't really blame them, because Transformers 1 doesn't have this.
Megatron must be stopped, no matter the cost.